Ragged breaths filled the air, merging with the sound of rain pouring down on the old, weathered roof. Darkness engulfed the living room, with only a faint glimmer of light coming from a phone hastily dropped on the floor. Myra trembled, pressed against the cold wall, her helpless hands clutching at the edge of her nightgown that had just been pulled entirely to one side. Scorching breath seared the nape of her neck, the scent of his body, so familiar yet dangerously intoxicating. Aiden pressed Myra firmly against the wall, his strong arm pinning her in place, his lips still tasting of the forbidden, feverish kiss they'd just shared. Their eyes met, confused, angry, hungry, and afraid. Somewhere out in the hallway, footsteps echoed and then abruptly fell silent. Every sense in their bodies was strung tight, waiting, the air thick with tension, the boundary between right and wrong now reduced to nothing but skin against skin, chest pressed to chest. "Stop," Myra whispered, her voice hoarse and trembling, yet her body leaned in closer, shivering as Aiden's hand slid over her bare waist, his breath trailing along her collarbone. "I can't," Aiden's voice was low, his chest heaving, his burning palm still refusing to leave his sister-in-law's skin. Outside, the rain poured down relentlessly, drowning out any final, rational thought. In that darkness, everything that had once been right, every rule and restraint, melted away with every wild heartbeat, every desperate breath. If anyone asked, when did it really begin, was it this moment? Or was it on another night, when their eyes first met in secret at the lonely train station? When Aiden returned after years away, and everything that should have been ordinary slowly began to slip out of control. Perhaps everything began with that very first glance. The afternoon sun was fading, the small train station at the end of the street bathed in patches of golden light spilling over old bricks. Myra stood leaning against a steel pillar, her hands clasped tightly together, an unconscious gesture of self-defense. She kept telling herself that she was simply picking up her brother-in-law, that it was just another ordinary day. But nothing felt ordinary anymore, not since Aiden appeared at the far end of the platform, pulling his suitcase, his hair damp with sweat, his tall frame casting a shadow across distant memories. Myra didn't even realize she was holding her breath until Aiden stopped right in front of her and smiled. "Have you been waiting long, sis?" His voice was deeper than before, a husky note in his throat that made Myra flustered. She shook her head, forcing a reply. "I just got here. Was the journey tiring?" Aiden laughed, shaking his tousled hair, his eyes lingering on Myra's face a little longer than necessary. Everything about him felt both familiar and foreign. The sharp lines of his face had shed the awkwardness of youth, his shoulders broad and body more solid, hands larger, movements more confident, his gaze quiet and searching, as if trying to decipher something hidden in Myra's eyes. The taxi pulled up in front of them. Myra hurried to grab the suitcase, trying to hide the flicker of emotion that had passed between them. In the car, the air felt stifling with the smell of new plastic, her delicate perfume from her collar mixing with the warm, masculine scent of Aiden's sweat. They chatted about trivial things, university, work, about Ethan, Aiden's older brother, who was preparing a welcome dinner at home. Yet every word hung in the air, unable to dispel that faint tension swirling between them. That night, the once familiar house suddenly felt strangely cramped. Myra busied herself in the kitchen, hiding her awkwardness behind rearranging dishes and wiping a table already spotless. Ethan was busy on the phone with a client, laughter echoing from the living room, leaving the two of them alone in the small kitchen, barely enough space for their bodies to brush past each other. Aiden leaned against the doorframe, his eyes silently following Myra's every movement. "You still like to wear this kind of apron, don't you?" The question slipped out, making Myra pause, her hand unconsciously tightening around the dish towel. "I'm used to it, it's convenient." She didn't dare turn around, only feeling Aiden's breath drawing closer and closer, as if the distance between them had never been wide, only that they had never truly looked at each other this closely before. Their shoulders brushed as they reached for something at the counter. Myra flinched slightly, but Aiden didn't pull away. He bent down to help her pick up a fallen spoon, their fingers brushing. A simple touch, yet Myra felt a jolt of electricity running down her spine. Their eyes met, just for a brief instant, and in that moment the world outside faded away, leaving only the two of them and emotions that had no name. Ethan entered, bringing a draft of cool air from outside, and everything snapped back to normal as if nothing had happened. Aiden turned away, laughing and teasing his brother about his favorite dishes. Myra tried to join the conversation, but her heart was pounding wildly in her chest, her hands still trembling from that fleeting moment. Night fell and the house was uncomfortably quiet. Ethan went to bed early, needing to leave for a work trip the next morning, while Myra sat absent-mindedly in the living room, eyes on the television but not really watching. Outside, a gentle rain began, each drop tapping against the fogged window pane, smudging streaks of light across the dark wood floor. She listened for the faint footsteps in the hallway, pausing and then stopping. Myra stood, thirsty, and quietly made her way to the kitchen. The soft light from the kitchen lamp cast a gentle glow, stretching her slender shadow across the floor. Aiden was already there, wearing only a thin pair of shorts, his bare back turned toward the sink, shoulders relaxed in the cool light. Myra suddenly felt her throat go dry, unable to resist letting her eyes linger on the line from the nape of his neck down to his waist. In that moment, all boundaries between sister-in-law and brother-in-law seemed to dissolve, leaving only a man and a woman in the forbidden darkness. Aiden turned, his deep eyes locking onto Myra's, neither of them uttering a word. The light spilled over his collarbones, droplets of water tracing down from his hair to his back. Myra looked away quickly, brushing past Aiden to pour herself a glass of water, but the warmth of his skin, the scent of his body, made her head spin. Standing side by side, the air between them thickened, their quiet breaths mingling in the small, enclosed space. Aiden suddenly spoke, his voice husky. "Can't sleep either, sis." Myra shook her head, trying to keep her voice steady. "You too." Aiden smiled, his eyes lingering on the loose neckline of her nightgown, then nodded quietly. The distance between them was now just a single touch away. Myra took a sip of water, avoiding her brother-in-law's gaze, but her hand trembled slightly, her lips burning with that unfamiliar sensation creeping through her body. They stood there in the intersection of darkness and light, where every boundary felt as fragile as the silence itself. That night, Myra returned to her room unable to sleep. The steady rain outside, the wind rattling the roof, and the chaotic thoughts clinging to her mind. In Myra's head, the image of Aiden's bare back, his gaze, part boy, part man, and the heat of his breath on her nape, all blended into a vague, dangerous yearning that she could neither name nor escape. She wondered what would happen if tonight, or any other night, she didn't have the strength to walk away. If, just once, she let herself follow her feelings, let her body drift closer to that darkness, would she ever have the strength to stop herself again? Outside, the rain kept falling, drawing tangled streaks across the window, just like Myra's heart, knotted and restless, quietly waiting for an inevitable explosion. Ethan woke earlier than usual, quickly packing his suitcase. His reminders to Myra about work, meals, and travel schedules echoing around the house, habitual and routine. Myra nodded, smiling, but deep in her eyes there was a feeling she couldn't name. Something like relief laced with anticipation. As if the moment Ethan pulled his suitcase through the gate, the very air in their home would change forever. Aiden stood in the hallway, silent, watching his brother, the final handshake between them tighter than usual. Only when the gate closed did the space between Myra and Aiden truly become their own. The spacious house suddenly felt oddly quiet. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting honey-colored light across the wooden floors, but that gentle warmth was not enough to hide the silent, simmering heat that curled through each room. Myra cleaned up half-heartedly, lingering longer than necessary in the kitchen, the one place she knew Aiden would pass by at any moment. She heard his footsteps behind her, light as a breeze, sending a shiver through her even though she'd grown used to his presence. Aiden entered wearing only a thin t-shirt and sports shorts, his hair still damp, the scent of his body wash mingling with the midday sun, forming a fragrance that was almost intoxicating. Myra turned, meeting his eyes as he studied her intently, lips pressed together as if holding back an unspoken question. She picked up a water jug, pouring slowly, trying not to let her hand tremble under the bright daylight. Aiden moved closer, reaching up to get a glass for her, his fingers brushing against Myra's wrist, a fleeting touch, but enough to send her heart skipping a beat. She quickly stepped away, but the look they exchanged lingered, heavy in the air. Breakfast passed with the sound of spoons on bowls, the TV quietly playing in the background, masking thoughts neither could speak aloud. After the meal, Aiden wandered upstairs to the gym. Myra remained, every nerve in her body taut, straining to hear his footsteps above her. She made an excuse to tidy the rooms, but really she wanted to pass by Aiden's door to catch a whiff of music, the sound of his breath quickening as he worked out, the faint trace of sweat in the air. She closed the door quietly behind her, telling herself to stay rational, but her heart raced at every thought of what she'd just heard or smelled. In the afternoon, golden light filled the house. Myra went for a walk in the yard, but soon returned, sweat beading on her neck, hair clinging to her nape. She changed into a thin cotton dress that revealed her collarbones and long, smooth legs, pretending indifference as she headed to the kitchen. Aiden appeared at almost the same moment, his white t-shirt clinging to his damp back, the veins standing out on his arms, his gaze no longer hiding the attention he paid Myra. They met at the sink, Aiden bending forward to wash his hands, Myra standing so close behind him her breath brushed his shoulder. The distance between them could be measured in warmth, and neither wanted to break the silence. A drop of water splashed onto Myra's dress, and she gave a soft gasp. Aiden immediately turned, reaching for a towel to help her. His fingers lightly brushed the moist skin on her thigh, an innocent apology yet full of intent, his eyes lingering on her bare shoulder and the curves of her body. Myra pressed her lips together, pulling away from Aiden's touch, but both of them knew nothing about this was truly accidental anymore. The air in the kitchen seemed to thicken, every breath filled with anticipation, with desire held in check so tightly it almost hurt. That evening, Myra sat on the sofa, glancing at work emails but her mind adrift. The sound of water running in the bathroom filled the apartment, and she kept picturing Aiden under the shower, wet hair, bare skin, droplets of water tracing down his back. These images replayed in her mind. Myra pressed her hand to her forehead, trying to banish the thoughts, but the harder she pushed them away, the deeper they clung. When Aiden stepped out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, hair dripping, his gaze wandered over Myra's body, stopping a little too long at the hem of her nightgown, the air between them thickening, every sound from outside muffled by a haze of anticipation. That night, Myra chose a thinner nightdress than usual, the fabric so light it was nearly see-through where the lamp hit it. Aiden tried to hide his glances, but every so often she caught him looking, her heart tightening with a mixture of embarrassment and an unexplainable longing. As Aiden quietly cleared the dishes, Myra lingered behind him, the two of them brushing past each other in the hallway, bodies barely touching but enough to freeze both in place, feeling their own hearts pounding. In the middle of the night, Myra awoke, thirsty, stepping out of her room without her robe. The dim light fell across her nightdress, making it look even more translucent, mist-like. She didn't know Aiden had also left his room at the same moment. They faced each other in the kitchen, eyes locked, all words forgotten, breath mingling in the darkness. Myra bit her lip, quickly turning away to pour herself a glass of water. But Aiden's gaze stayed glued to the slender curve of her back and the gentle sweep of her hips under the thin fabric. His hand clenched into a fist, fighting a losing battle between reason and desire. Myra tried to compose herself as she drank, but her bare foot brushed against Aiden's under the table. She looked up, meeting his unapologetic stare, both of them caught in that moment, unable to speak, unable to move forward, but also unable to retreat. She returned to her room, her heart racing, lying in bed with her breath still unsteady. Her fingers traced the spot where Aiden had touched her earlier, Myra closing her eyes, surrendering to fantasies she would never dare voice aloud. The soft trickle of water from the bathroom, the sound of footsteps barely audible on the wooden floor, and the memory of young, masculine skin haunted her deeper and deeper. That night, Myra dreamed of being hugged from behind, of stolen kisses, of being held tight in warm arms and breathless gasps against her nape. In the morning, when she woke, sunlight filled the room, but the scent of the night before and those unnamed desires still clung to her, haunting her with every breath. It had only been a day since Ethan left, yet the distance between Myra and Aiden had never been so small. Even so, they were still standing at the edge of a fragile boundary, one that, if crossed, could never be undone. Rain began to fall just as the afternoon light faded, long streaks sliding down the window pane, covering the room in a damp, gray cold that crept into every corner. Myra sat by the window, watching flashes of lightning rip through the sky, thunder rumbling in the distance, while inside her, another storm raged, swirling, relentless. Aiden returned from the gym, his hair still drenched, dark t-shirt clinging to sweat-slick skin, the veins in his arms etched sharply, forming a manly silhouette Myra couldn't help but steal glances at. She tried to keep her eyes on the book in her hands, but not a single word registered. The sound of Aiden's footsteps grew closer, stopping by the sofa, his eyes fixed on Myra for a long, heavy moment. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rain outside and their mingled breaths, an invisible pressure neither dared break. Suddenly, the house went dark, the lights flickering and then dying out completely, leaving only faint streetlight seeping through the curtains. Myra startled, her heart pounding, the space around them shrinking, every sense heightened to a sharp edge. Aiden moved quietly to her side, gently laying a hand on her shoulder, the warmth of his palm seeping through her thin shirt, sending a shiver through her. In the darkness, every contour of their bodies felt sharper, heartbeat, breath, the scent of skin all painfully vivid. "Are you scared?" Aiden whispered, his breath warm on her hair, so close it nearly brushed her neck. Myra shook her head, though her voice wavered. "It's just been a while since we lost power." "It's fine." Aiden sat beside her, a thin blanket wrapped around them both. Myra could feel his body heat pressing against her, every accidental brush of their legs or elbows like a bolt of electricity. Outside, the rain intensified, and the small room seemed to quiet itself, amplifying the most secret sounds. The swallow of nerves, a soft moan in the throat, their breaths quickening as warmth coiled between them. A flash of lightning illuminated the room and Myra turned, suddenly locking eyes with Aiden. In his gaze was a deep darkness, brazen, hungry, and achingly vulnerable. Neither spoke, no warning signaled the moment, only bodies betraying their minds as Myra let her head fall against Aiden's shoulder, her hand sliding unconsciously down his thigh, feeling the tense, eager pulse beneath thin fabric. Aiden's hand stroked lightly along Myra's back, his fingers drifting from the nape of her neck to her waist, moving slowly but deliberately, his breath scorching hot beside her ear. Myra couldn't resist, her body trembling in waves, eyes closed to savor each small movement of his fingers, each gentle squeeze making her lips part in breathless, silent moans. His hand did not stop, drawing Myra closer, their breaths blending into one, the rain outside bearing witness to this forbidden moment. "Stop," Myra whispered, but they both knew neither wanted to. Aiden took her earlobe between his lips, pulling her onto his lap, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist, as if letting go would make everything disappear. Myra sat motionless in his embrace, feeling the wild thrum of both their hearts. Then, all at once, she bent down and found his lips in the dark. Their first kiss exploded between rain and ragged breaths. A sweet, wet taste mingled with the heat of their bodies, every rule evaporating as if it never existed. Aiden pulled Myra closer still, his hand running along her back, gripping her soft waist, each kiss deepening, Myra's tiny moans echoing through the room, her first confession of guilt. His fingers tangled in her hair, pulling her close so their mouths couldn't part, every breath just enough to let them plunge again into reckless longing. Time stopped, just heat burning in every muscle, Myra's skin feverish and shivering in his arms, and Aiden seeming to lose control of himself entirely. Myra rested her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, surrendering to his hand as it drifted over her bare thigh, squeezing gently, then slipping beneath the edge of her nightdress. No words were needed, only panting breaths and soft moans blending with the rain. Until in that moment, all boundaries between sister-in-law and brother-in-law vanished. Just as everything was about to slip out of control, Myra froze, gently pushing Aiden's shoulder, her eyes wide, filled with fear and desire. She whispered, "We can't, Aiden, stop." Aiden hugged Myra tightly, his lips brushing her neck, murmuring between ragged breaths, "I'm sorry. But I can't forget this feeling, Myra." They sat in silence in each other's arms, hearts pounding, their breathing slow to settle. The rain kept falling outside, darkness shrouding them, and all sense faded before the fierce, wordless pull rising between them. When the lights flickered back on, Myra stood up in a rush, straightening her nightdress, her eyes dodging Aiden's. She hurried back to her room, leaving Aiden alone on the sofa, his hands clenched as if trying to hold onto the last bit of warmth. That night, neither of them slept, each in their own room, yet inside, a new fire raged, guilt, passion, and bewilderment blending into hopeless longing. From that moment, they both knew there was no turning back. Once the line had been crossed, even for a heartbeat, the old, safe world they once knew was gone forever. After that rainy night, nothing was ever the same. The air in the house thickened with each passing day, tense and suffocating with emotions that had no name. Myra avoided Aiden's gaze during the day, telling herself to keep her distance, trying to play the role of the proper, composed sister-in-law as she always had. But all that willpower was nothing more than a thin mask. Every time she passed Aiden in the hallway, every time she felt his quiet stare from behind, her whole world trembled with wild, irrepressible sounds she could never silence. Aiden no longer bothered to keep his distance. He was everywhere Myra was, always with a perfectly reasonable excuse, asking about the menu, wanting her advice on laundry, or simply standing close while she chopped vegetables in the kitchen. Sometimes, his hand would rest on her shoulder a second too long. His fingers would brush lightly over the back of her hand, and his gaze no longer tried to hide the hunger that Myra felt burning, hot as fire, all the way down to her skin. Each time, Myra shuddered, forcing herself to step away, but her heart surged toward him. At night, everything became even more dangerous. Myra no longer dared to wear thin night dresses, but the more she tried to cover up, the more vivid her imagination became. She tossed and turned in bed, remembering every detail of Aiden's hand on her back, his breath burning against her ear, the first stolen kiss beneath the stormy blanket. The sound of water running in the bathroom next door reached into her dreams, her heart racing with every forbidden vision, every desire that grew stronger with each passing night. Some afternoons, Aiden would be working out in the gym, the door left ajar. Myra would walk past, catching the scent of male sweat, hearing his ragged breathing as he lifted weights. She couldn't help but linger a moment longer, just to watch his toned body in the mirror. Sometimes, she'd catch his eyes in the reflection and quickly look away, but Aiden would only smile. A man's smile, confident, challenging, as if he knew every secret Myra was hiding inside. During dinner, the two would sit across from each other, their eyes meeting now and then, neither saying a word too many. Once, when Ethan called unexpectedly, Myra was washing dishes when Aiden quietly came up behind her, his hand pressing gently on her hip, his breath hot against her neck. Myra froze, struggling to keep her composure as she spoke to her husband, her voice faltering as Aiden's hand slid under her shirt, caressing the delicate skin of her waist, his lips brushing her nape for just an instant before pulling away as if nothing had happened. When the call ended, Myra leaned against the wall, her heart pounding, her mind spinning with sensations that were both sinful and intoxicating. One night, Aiden waited for Myra in the living room, the yellow lamp casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Myra came in, meaning only to retrieve a forgotten book, but the moment she closed the door, Aiden rose, moving close, his eyes deep and intense. There was no need for words, only their quickening breaths, heat spreading through the room. Aiden's hand circled behind her back, pulling Myra close, his lips searching for hers, no longer hesitant, but urgent with desire suppressed too long. They kissed wildly, tangling on the sofa, on the floor, in the darkness where only their breath and stifled moans filled the air. Aiden's hands traveled across Myra's body, leaving burning trails wherever he touched. Myra clung to his shoulders, surrendering to instinct. Her dress slipped askew, bare skin exposed under the dim light, her mouth releasing strangled moans as Aiden gripped her waist, pulling her so close the rest of the world blurred to nothing. Their moans mingled with the wind outside, every sense focused on each other. The risk of being caught only made every breath, every touch more trembling, more addictive. Every time Aiden whispered Myra's name in her ear, she shivered, her body responding on instinct, unable to tell right from wrong. They grew more secretive with each encounter, in the living room, on the staircase, even in the bathroom with the water roaring to cover Myra's cries. Each time they risked everything, they slipped further from the old boundaries, closer to the edge of the abyss. One evening, Ethan unexpectedly announced he'd be home earlier than planned. Myra was shaken, her heart racing, while Aiden remained silent, his eyes flashing with a mix of challenge and pain. That night, with Ethan sleeping soundly in the next room, Aiden quietly pulled Myra into the bathroom. Their bodies pressed together beneath the warm stream, mouths locked, breaths ragged, moans echoing in the small space. Myra clung to Aiden's shoulders, unable to break away from the sensation of being held tight, of being touched to her core in secret, the fear and the pleasure mingling into a dangerous addiction. Outside, the house was utterly silent, only the sound of dripping water and the wind in the eaves. When it was over, Myra sat against the wall, eyes closed, her whole body feverish. She knew she had gone too far, every boundary broken, but she also knew that if Aiden whispered her name again, if he just touched her, if he looked at her with that hungry gaze, she would tumble into that abyss once more. Consequences be damned. And out there, in the room next door, Ethan slept on, completely unaware of the whirlwind of forbidden love tearing everything apart in the shadows of their home. No one spoke about what had happened, but both of them knew, with each passing day, they were sinking deeper into that forbidden loop. Myra avoided looking Aiden in the eyes whenever Ethan was in the room, doing her best to act normal. Taking care of meals, tidying the house, listening to her husband talk about work and trivial worries. But all those old habits now felt like a hollow disguise. In her mind, the image of Aiden crept into every breath, every faintest touch. During the day, just brushing past each other in the hallway, a light touch of the fingertips when reaching for something, or an accidental closeness on the narrow staircase, was enough to make Myra tremble with anticipation and fear. Sometimes, just a quiet glance from Aiden sent shivers through her entire body, her breath quickening as if she were being pulled back into those wild nights, under the water, on the cold kitchen floor, or even in the tiny kitchen itself. Every early morning, while Ethan was still asleep, Myra would sneak down to the kitchen, always startled to find Aiden already there, leaning against the fridge, coffee in hand, watching her with eyes both fierce and tender. Sometimes he said nothing at all, simply placing a hand on her waist, pressing her back lightly against his chest, the familiar scent of his skin blending with the coffee and the chill of dawn. There were times Myra shivered, slipping quickly out of his arms at the faintest noise from the hallway, the fear of being discovered only sharpening her arousal, intensifying her guilt, making the addiction even sweeter. Aiden changed too, growing quieter around his brother, coming alive only when he was with Myra, when every glance, every movement burned with longing. Secret messages sent whenever Ethan's back was turned, a few short words, an emoji, a subtle hint, were enough to leave Myra restless all afternoon, her mind drifting until evening. At night, her senses sharpened even more. Myra lay beside her husband, listening to Ethan's steady breathing, but her mind wandered to the other side of the wall, to where she knew Aiden was also lying awake. She imagined his hands gliding over her skin, his lips grazing her neck, and suddenly felt her own body warming, caught in a silent fever she could no longer control. Some nights she bolted upright, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe, her hand unconsciously sliding over her belly, remembering every stolen touch, every moan that had slipped out in the darkness. Once, after Ethan left on a business trip, with only the two of them at home, Aiden pulled Myra into the living room in broad daylight, whispered something wicked in her ear. Before she could react, he'd pulled her onto his lap, his hot hand sliding under her dress, his mouth on hers, breathless and wild, Myra's soft moans rising, quiet but burning into her heart like fire. They clung to each other on the couch, every limit shattered. Only when Myra's phone buzzed with a message from Ethan did she come to her senses, gently pushing Aiden away. They looked at each other, satisfaction and fear tangled together in their eyes. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier by the day. Ethan started noticing changes in his wife, the way her eyes darted away, her smile losing its ease, her hand cold when he reached for her. Myra knew she could no longer hide, but she was powerless to stop. She was addicted to the feeling of being touched where no one else knew, addicted to waiting for a secret message, addicted to Aiden's whispers behind her, when he'd appear suddenly in an empty hallway and lean in close, his lips at her ear. "Do you miss me?" Once, in the middle of a family dinner, Myra received a message from Aiden. "I want to touch you right now." She trembled, her face flushing, hands gripping her thigh under the table just to contain the storm inside. Each secret word, each shared glance, was like another drop of poison feeding her addiction day after day. Late one night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Myra slipped out onto the balcony for air, only for Aiden to appear beside her. Not a word was spoken. He pulled her into a dark corner, holding her tight from behind, his lips trailing along her neck. Myra gasped for breath, her body melting in his arms, surrendering to instinct, letting every trace of guilt dissolve into breath and soft moans lost in the night wind. And then there were nights in the cramped bathroom, warm water pouring over their skin, two bodies finding each other like fire to gasoline. Breaths, water, Myra's moans, all blended into a forbidden symphony. Every touch burned, every gentle bite on her shoulder, every time Aiden whispered her name, branding her memory in ways she could never erase. After each feverish encounter, Myra lay still, staring at her blurred reflection in the steamy mirror, asking herself who she had become, how far she'd gone, and why just a single touch, a single whispered word could topple every value, every bit of virtue she had spent her life building. She felt regret and craving, wanted to run and yet wanted to dive even deeper. Sometimes she wished everything could stop at a single touch, a glance, a dream. But deep down, she knew it was too late. She was addicted, addicted to the forbidden, addicted to Aiden's body, addicted to the risk, addicted to that fragile boundary she edged closer to with every passing day. No one knew, and no one could ever understand how a secret love, how the addiction of flesh, could be stronger than any rule, stronger than any reason. In recent days, the air in the house had grown heavy, as if every wall knew their secret. Myra woke each morning anxious and weary, the signs of sleepless nights spent wrestling with longing and guilt still clear beneath her eyes. Ethan returned from his long trip, bringing with him not only his familiar care, but also a growing suspicion. He noticed every touch, every look, the smallest details between his wife and his younger brother, things he'd never thought twice about before. Family dinners became tense. Ethan asked about changes in the house, about the odd feeling of being home again. But Myra only avoided his gaze, laughing off his questions, while Aiden always looked away, his eyes sometimes finding Myra's as if in a silent apology, a wordless reminder of the bond they couldn't break. Each time it happened, Myra felt her heart twist. Between them lay a secret world that could collapse with nothing more than a single careless breath. Ethan started coming home earlier, trying to reconnect with his wife through dinners, brief hugs in the hallway, aimless conversations. Myra returned every gesture with gentle devotion, but the emptiness inside her kept growing. She felt herself slipping further along the line between dutiful wife and sinful woman, between reason and instinct. And the more she clung to the part of the good wife, the more she ached to live her truth, to be touched, to breathe, to hear her name whispered in the dark by the very man she shouldn't love. One night, when Ethan had already fallen asleep, Myra lay restless, her fingers absently caressing her phone. She opened an old message from Aiden. "Do you miss me?" That small line dragged her straight down into the depths of her addiction. She knew that just one touch, one message, would be enough to bring every wall crashing down. That night, Myra couldn't take it anymore. She left the bedroom, quietly making her way downstairs. In the dim light, Aiden was already waiting in the living room, saying nothing, simply opening his arms to her. Myra fell into his embrace as if tumbling into an abyss, and the two of them wrapped around each other in desperate silence. Mouth on mouth, skin on skin, every sensation burning in a fever without escape. Myra cried, moaning and whispering apologies, but the more she cried, the less she could stop. Aiden held her tight, whispering her name over and over as if it was the last time they would ever be together. Outside, it began to rain again. The sound of the rain drowned out every breath, every moan, every dream of a normal love that they both knew they could never have. When it was over, Myra collapsed in Aiden's arms, her breath barely calming when the hallway light flicked on. Ethan stood there, stunned, his eyes full of despair as he saw everything, his wife's bare body, his brother's arms wrapped tightly around her. No words could possibly explain the scene. Everything crumbled in that instant. Ethan turned away, saying nothing. Myra broke down, struggling to free herself from Aiden's embrace to run after her husband, but her legs no longer had the strength. Aiden quietly held her one last time, then let go, leaving Myra to slide down onto the cold floor, every feeling of happiness, guilt, pleasure, and pain dissolving in her tears. The days that followed were a suffocating silence. Myra moved through the house like a shadow, haunted by Ethan's last look. Aiden packed his things and left without a word of goodbye, leaving behind only a few short lines. "I'm sorry. If I could do it all over again, I'd still want to love you one more time." Myra stood before the mirror, looking into her own eyes, wondering if all the cracks in her heart would ever truly heal. Sometimes she remembered Aiden's hands, remembered that forbidden sensation that once brought both her body and soul to life. But in the end, it was only memory, both sweet and cruel. And even though it was over, there are some limits that, once crossed, you can never return to who you were before.